We have Iain Tollhurst, and it is going to be Ramiel. I hope I'm saying that right. Ramiel wood chip revisited: applications and benefits for livestock tillage and horticulture. Put your hands together, please.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not from a farming background. Originally, I'm actually from a woodworking background. I started in farming over 50 years ago. I actually started on a dairy farm, so I was really interested to hear the previous presentation, because much of what goes on dairy farms actually happens on my farm, although we have no livestock at all. How do I move on to the next one? Oh, where is it? Who's got the tool? Here it is. Right, okay, let's see if I can get this to work. Right, so farm business, we're going to take you on a bit of a journey just to explain how we make use of Ramiel wood chip on the farm. We've been established since 1976, so I'm one of the original hippie dirt farmers, if you like. We've been on the present site for 36 years. We're stock-free organic. We have no livestock on the farm. We haven't used any livestock inputs. We haven't used any fertilizer in that time. We're producing over 100 different vegetable crops, between 120, 140 tonnes a year. It's largely a self-sufficient system. All our sales are local. We depend very much on dealing direct to local sales. We run workshops, seminars. We have food festivals. We've had an ongoing trials and research for many, many decades, going way back into the 80s. And we do regular farm walks. So it's not just a farm, but the farm is a commercial farm. We are dependent on the product of that farm to ensure that farm survives. So we're not supported by any exterior forces. We don't get any payments at all from government for what we do. Right, here we got our field cropping. We are 7 hectares of field. It's just under 20 acres. We also have a wall garden. Our field cropping has been divided up into agroforestry. We brought this about some 6 or 7 years ago. Taking that decision to go into agroforestry is a big one. There's a lot to be thought about, and we're still learning the process. We're still learning how to manage this, but it has made a big change to farm. And the reason I went into agroforestry primarily was 2 reasons. 1, I wanted to improve the biodiversity, and 2, I wanted wood chip, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So we're very lucky to be in quite a pretty part of the country. This is southern England, not far from Reading. Our climate is completely different from the climate here. Our annual rainfall is around 550 millimetres, so less than 30 inches. We get sunshine, not all the time, but we do get probably more sunshine than you do. We get colder winters, although that hasn't been particularly true in the last 20 years. We've also got a wall garden, which is 1 hectare, where we grow very intensive cropping. We have 25,000 square foot of greenhouses and tunnels there, so we're cropping all year round. We never stop. We harvest 4 days a week, every single week of the year. It's a continual process. The problem we face really in agriculture is really, and particularly so in horticulture, is demands on fertility. We are expecting a lot out of our soil. We are expecting a lot of cropping. We are feeding a lot of people, and we're putting a lot of pressure on our soil, not just in terms of the potential for losing fertility, but also the potential for soil damage. So we were looking long-term many years ago at how we were going to maintain this system of farming without much in the way of conventional inputs, and we started to use green manures, increasingly so. And suddenly one day, the idea of perhaps using wood purely happened by accident. We were having a party, and one of my neighbours, who's a tree surgeon, said, "Here, Tolly, I've got a whole load of wood chips in the back of my truck. I need to get rid of it. I have to take it to a local dump, and they're going to charge me 50 quid. Are you interested?" I said, "Well, okay, we'll give it a try." Not thinking this was going to happen. The following morning, in the gateway of my field was a big steaming pile of wood chips, which we had to deal with. So that was the start of the process of me suddenly realising that our farm had been missing something. In the back of my mind, we were intensively cropping, using lots of green manures, but not actually putting much back apart from green manures. And there was this kind of worrying, nagging feeling that perhaps we were exploiting our carbon. So this looked to be a possible option of perhaps maintaining or even increasing that carbon. Lack of bedding materials is another issue, and not perhaps so much where we are, but I know in Ireland, bedding materials can be in short supply as well. And the issue around soil carbon, we've heard quite a bit about soil carbon already, and I would agree with one of the previous speakers that to build soil carbon is a very, very long and protracted process. You do not build real soil carbon in less than decades. We're talking almost geological time spans. Wood, I see, has the potential to improve the possibility of building carbon perhaps in shorter time spans. So solution, wood chip. There's two types of material we use. One is pure wood chip, which is mixed species. It comes from a tree surgeon. It can contain all sorts of different species, often will contain some things we don't want. We get the odd chainsaw helmet and things like that, plastic bags, Coke cans. But in general, it's very clean. It's not been polluted. It's mostly coming from domestic gardens, so it's not subject to agricultural situations. It's not coming from somebody else's land. It's not a ghost acre, which would be someone else's land coming in. The other material we use is Ramule chip wood, which perhaps few people maybe have heard of. And I came across Ramule chip wood about 20 years ago as a result of a trip to US, and I discovered that there were one or two farmers there using Ramule chip wood. Particularly so in North America. In Canada, they've been doing this for some while. And Ramule chip wood is quite different from waste, tree surgeon waste. Ramule chip wood is harvested direct from the tree. It's harvested in the winter. It's any tree which is generally less than 75 millimeter, 3 inches, or it's young wood. In most cases, it will come from coppice material, but there are other options as well. It's only ever processed in the winter. We would never do this in the summer. It's processed without leaf. It's processed brown. Now, I'd had a really bad experience with wood chips 40-odd years ago when we were growing strawberries, and I used wood shaving waste from a joinery workshop as a mulch. It's a disaster because it locks up huge amounts of carbon. So the benefits of wood chip are primarily fungi. We don't see this material as being, it's not a fertilizer. We're not feeding plants, we're feeding the soil. And we're using it primarily to introduce fungi. If you go into any woodland situation, scratch around in the tree, leaf, debris on the ground, you'll see masses of fungi. Mycorrhiza, mycelium, there's a whole completely unknown world going on beneath those trees. We're completely lacking that in our arable and even in our grassland systems. We do not have this fungal association in most of our land. It's been completely lost because most of our land hasn't seen trees for such a long time. We've lost all those fungal benefits. So the idea about reintroducing those lost fungal benefits really comes through the use of either Ramule chip wood or composted wood chip. It's going to improve the soil biome. The soil biome makes the human gut biome look simple because the soil biome is incredibly complex. And I think we may have heard today about how complex this is. It goes on, and most farmers feel, including myself, feel quite daunted by the lack of knowledge we have about what happens in the soil. The more we get to know about what happens in the soil, the more we realize we don't really know anything about it. It's hugely complex. So the soil biome is going to be improved by the use of wood and its fungi. It improves the soil in terms of its drainage ability. It improves carbon levels. Again, this is quite slow. I'm not making massive claims here about huge amounts of carbon sequestration. That's not really what I'm here to do. But it will certainly preserve carbon if it's used in the right way. Earthworms love it, and I'll show you how much they love it in a minute. And it will add very small amounts of nutrient in terms of phosphate and potash. There is a small amount there. It's pretty minor. You'd have to add a huge amount of Ramule or composted wood chip to really improve any P&K levels. Right, so composting wood chips. Now, wood chip, again, just to remind you, this is mixed wood from trees. It usually comes from tree surgeons. And we compost this in a windrow system. It's turned roughly every 3 or 4 months. The windrow is as long as you like. It's 2 or 3 times the length of this room, 4 meters wide and 2 meters high. It loses around 50% of its bulk over a period of 12 months. The composting takes around 12 months. It's very easy to compost. We add nothing. There's nothing added at all. We don't even water it. It gets very dry in the summer. It works really well in a damp environment. So it works much better during the winter than it would in the summer. So it's turned on a regular basis and stockpiled, and we spread it usually during the growing season. Here we got, I usually hire swing shovel digger for a few days. It's quite efficient, quick way of turning it. This is a cross-section of a composted wood chip heap. It's brown, it's friable, it contains a huge number of fungi and bacteria. It has been very hot. It certainly always gets to 65. We have had temperatures as high as 80, so you can actually cook potatoes over 24 hours if you really want to. So there's a lot going on in this compost heap. Eventually it slows down and the biological activity becomes completely different. It changes as it goes through its different phases. We're loading it onto I have an ancient Kid spreader. I don't know how many people here still remember the old 7.5 ton Kid spreaders. I have one of those with a moving floor. We load it into that. It takes around, it's about 7 cubic meters, so 3.5 ton or so. And that's enough to do a few rows spreading in the field. We only do the spreading during the summer, during the growing season. We never do it during the winter, not compost. The application rates are around 50 to 70 cubic meters per hectare. That's around 25, 30 odd tons per acre. I tend to think more in terms of cubic meters. It's much easier to understand. It's much easier to manage. Weights of organic materials are notoriously unreliable and difficult to predict. In terms of how much goes on, if you add 1 millimeter of this material per hectare, that is 10 cubic meters. So we're not putting on huge amounts. We're putting on about 5, 6, 7 millimeters of material. And that's going on to our green manure part of the rotation, which is almost identical to our previous speaker, the dairy farm, who has an all-species mix. We have an all-species mix with lots of chicory. And the comments he made about chicory, I could absolutely endorse, because chicory is one of the best plants you can have in any growing system, whether it's dairy, horticulture, or arable, because of deep rooting and the way it manages the reserves of the soil. So we're always applying this material when it's the growing season and crops can take that nutrient up. Moving on, with this material, apart from using it within our rotation, so we apply it twice in a 7-year rotation, we also use it for plant raising. We raise all our own plants. We don't buy any plants at all. We raise over 100,000 plants a year, of which half are in modules. And for that, we use this material as a substrate. We've completely given up buying any form of substrate in. We haven't bought any peat-based substrates for over 25 years. I'm appalled to say that the organic industry, I'm not sure about in Ireland, but in UK, many organic horticulturists are still dependent on using peat-based compost for plant raising. I can't believe how this can still be happening, given what we know about peat and its importance in terms of carbon sequestration. So we've taken peat out completely over a quarter of a century ago, and we're now using, and have been all that time, been using this material with nothing added at all to grow plants. And it works really well. High in nitrogen, high in nutrients, grows a great plant. It holds moisture, no weeds, it's renewable, it's cheap, and it's available. We can make this very easy. This is not a complex process at all. We did some trials some years ago with the Dutch Innovation Farming Trials, and we compared our own wood chip compost for plant raising with other brands, and it performed perfectly well. I won't bore you with too many figures, but the bright green is our compost. The dark green is our compost with biochar, and the other 2 brown ones was a commercial semi-peat reduced compost. The difference in terms of nitrogen, clearly on ours, we have very high levels of nitrogen. So the big kind of criticism about using wood chip in agricultural systems is you're going to lock up nitrogen. No, you don't. That nitrogen will always come back. And we can see clearly how that works with this substrate. We're applying this within our rotation on the farm. And the source of the material is important. So Ramule chip wood is the other material we use. This is not tree waste. This is Ramule chip wood from our own trees. We have about just over half an acre of coppers, which we planted 25 years ago. And we harvest that on an annual basis, rotationally. We're taking 1 row every year for 7 years. Our tree coppers rotation also coincides with our vegetable cropping rotation, which is also 7 years. So it lets light into the field when we need it. And we're taking this material every year. It goes through a chipper. We have a contractor who comes in, pair of chainsaws. The chipper goes straight into our muck spreader, which is not spreading muck, and it goes direct onto the field. There's other sources also we've been using for Ramule chip wood, and that's hedges. Now, hedges often tend to be sort of neglected. We've got our hedges, some we planted 30 years ago. They're the easy ones to manage. The really old ones, which were several hundred years old, are less easy to coppice, but they are coppicable. You can coppice hedges. And given that we've only got 20 acres, we've actually got over 2 kilometres of hedges around our fields. So the potential in terms of wood chip is quite high. So we are coppicing our hedgerows, or some of our hedgerows, on a cyclic basis, and using that also as Ramule chip wood. Now, most of the hedgerows we have tend to be hawthorn, blackthorn, and a few other things, which is okay. But the hedges that do the best are the ones we planted 25 years ago, which contain a mixed range of species and are much more productive. So we did trials. We wanted to know really a bit more about what we were doing. So the Organic Research Centre came out with a really interesting trial we ran on the farm. And it was really to assess the differences between composted wood chip tree waste from tree surgeons and Ramule chip wood, to see if there's any big difference between the two materials. This is what Ramule chip wood looks like when it's been spread. This is around between 50 and 70 cubic meters per hectare. It's a small amount. And this is going on to land. This is at the end of winter. It's early spring when it's dried out enough. It's going on to a green manure crop. We never, ever spread this material onto bare earth. In fact, we almost never have bare earth in our system anyway. We've always got ground cover. To put this onto bare soil would be very wasteful. The most efficient way of using Ramule wood chip or any composted wood chip is onto a green manure mix. And that green manure mix there is a all species mix. It contains 5 or 6 different legumes, one of which is white clover, red clover. We have lucerne, we have chicory, and we have a whole range of wildflowers as part of that very strong all species mix, which creates a huge amount of biological function in the soil. So we're adding to that, we're adding this wood chip, which is bringing in the fungi and the bacteria. So the trial site we set up was 1 hectare. Our vegetable cropping, each of our 1-year rotational blocks is 1 hectare exactly. So we set the trial up on that 1 hectare. This has been in a clover ley with the chicory for 2 years. So it is in a really good state of health. And we set the trial up across the field. We have replicates. We use the composted wood chip, which is CWC, and the Ramule chip wood as well. And we did alternates across the field. And the idea was that the following year, we would transverse these plots with vegetable cropping and see if we could pick up differences across the plots in our proposed vegetable cropping, which was potatoes and then brassica. So the whole trial was managed by the Organic Research Centre. They did huge amounts of testing. Our soil is not very easy to manage. It's grade 3B or 4. We have very low grade soil. It's very stony. We have 40% stone over 10 millimeters. It's not horticultural land, so it's quite hard work doing assessments. A lot of work was done on assessing biomass, so they were measuring from all the different plots biomass in quadrats. And we were doing soil health tests in terms of respiration tests, and also nutrient analysis and earthworm counts. Now, the earthworm counts are seriously hard work. They were taking, from each plot, they were taking 20 samples of 20 by 20 by 20 centimeters, sorting out all the worms, aging them because there's different ages, identifying the different species, and then making an assessment over the whole site as to how many earthworms. This is really hard work. This took several researchers days and days just on the earthworm counts. The results of soil health between the two materials, between the red is Ramule wood chip and the blue is composted wood chip. And at every point in every assessment we made, there was really no difference at all between the two products. So the same amount of nutrients, the same amount of calcium, the same amount of organic material, everything was pretty much the same. There was really no discernible difference, no statistically significant difference between the two plots. which is interesting. The biomass cuts were the same. There was really no difference between biomass cuts. So the interesting thing about the research was that there was no difference. And when I say no difference, there's no difference between the composted wood chip, the waste wood, or the ramule chip wood. But there is a difference because the composted chip wood has gone through a process of 12 months of composting. It's been turned. We've lost quite a lot of energy. We've created heat, which has been lost. We could have used some of it. We've lost some of that heat. We've reduced the amount of material to 50% of its original value. So in actual fact, we're putting on twice as much. For the same effect, we're using twice as much wood chip to get the same effect. So the question really was, well, why are we bothering to compost it? Why don't we just use it? Why don't we just use it as it is? Which is fine if it's ramule chip wood, but it's not fine if it's coming from wood waste because it contains a lot of often undesirable elements which need to be composted out. Things like evergreens, which are very problematical. You cannot effectively compost evergreen trees in any quantity because of the terpenes and the resins cause real problems. So the idea being that we would only be really using ramule wood chip was the ideal, but that means we have to grow more wood chip. So we got incredible diversity of mushrooms growing with the ramule wood chip. I mean, we've never seen so many species. In fact, we had a mycologist came around to identify some of which he'd never actually experienced before in the UK. So ramule is really good for encouraging and stimulating fungal activity. The worm cast had to be seen to be believed. I'd never seen worm casts like it. We've always been used to a really good earthworm population on the farm, but suddenly this earthworm population, when we started using ramule wood chip, really grew quite rapidly. And our observations really at the end of the trial was that we had a huge number of mushrooms on the ramule plots, much more so than on the composted wood chip. All the ramule wood was rotting on the surface. The ramule wood disappeared really quickly on the surface of the soil because we're applying it to green manures. There's loads of nitrogen. There's loads of biological activity. We're applying this ramule wood chip at a point in the rotation when we have very high biological function in the soil. The soil is in good health. It's not bare. It's not growing crops. It's in a period of rejuvenation. And very large number of worms. In fact, the final count, we got up to 15 million per hectare on one count, but the average count was 12 million worms per hectare. Now, that's a lot of worms. That's 1,200 worms per square meter. So if you imagine 1 square meter of our soil down to 20 centimeters, we have 1,200 worms in that area. And this has been verified not just on this 1 year of that trial, but also on other years as well. Okay, we have no livestock on our farm, but we have almost 10 tons of worms per hectare. That's our livestock. Most of the wood chip compost was also disappeared, but that had already been pre-composted. So we've already half rotted that stuff before it goes on the field anyway. There was stronger growth on the wood chip compost in the following crop. We had slightly better growth where we had compost compared with ramule wood chip. It didn't show at all on the potato crop, but it did show on the brassica crop 2 years later, which was quite interesting. And we had very good and the same root nodulation on the clovers within the plots. Right, we had the opportunity last year to do a really good, very intensive, 2 more minutes, okay. Very intensive study of our deep soil carbon. And when I say deep soil carbon, this is down to 1 meter. We had heard earlier on today about carbon usage, and we all talk about soil organic matter, which is in the top few inches. Well, that's very liable to get lost very quickly. But the real meaning of real carbon, if you really want really good carbon figures, you have to go really deep. So we had this chart done. The fields in red are ours. This is 35 years of continuous vegetable growing with quite a lot of cultivations, including ploughing, which a lot of people hate. Compared with my neighbour, same soil type, pasture-fed beef, organic, never been ploughed. And the results were interesting. This is the machine that took the samples, 1 meter deep. And our ground, this is hard work. We've got 12 oak trees per hectare in terms of carbon, but it's also the same on my neighbour's land. Our land is has not lost any carbon in 35 years at all, despite the fact we've been regular production, a lot of crop offtake, and we have produced a huge amount of food in that time. We have produced around 35,000 tonnes from this field. On livestock, I don't have much information about livestock for bedding, but I do know, and I did a search here in Ireland, there's a lot of companies offering wood chip, and I suspect it's mostly softwood from pine, which is quite difficult to compost, and you may not want to put this on your field until you have composted it, because it will lock up nitrogen. So do a little bit of work on that. And if you want to know more about the whole wood chip scenario and the trials that were done, the trials that we did were also done on 3 other farms, one of which was conventional. The Ramiel Wood Chip Guide is available from the Organic Research Centre in UK. And finally, this is our veg shed, this is our shop, and that's the end. Thank you very much.
One thing I love about this conference is how excited everyone got when you started talking about earthworms, and I love the idea of earthworms being your livestock as well. It's just fantastic. When you talk about the carbon measurements there, and if people think of some questions, we'll come around now in a second. Did you take those carbon measurements, 35 years ago, with the idea that you'd compare them again in 35 years?
Yes, I wish we'd managed to do that 35 years ago, because that would have been really good data and meaning evidence. Yes, we need to do it again in 35 years' time to see where we are. But my feeling is, what it did for me, it made me feel that we were not plundering or exploiting our carbon. We are managing to maintain our carbon in a system which is very productive in terms of vegetables.
Yeah, I guess it's food for thought for people who might want to do it now and compare carbon in 35 years. So yeah, we have questions down there. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Hannah. It's Grace Marr here from the Irish Organic Association. Tolly, I just was wondering, did that surprise you, the figure on the carbon? And would you solely put it down to the combination of the long-term green manures and the wood chip, or what's your thoughts on it?
Yes, no, it wasn't a surprise. It's what I hoped for, and I'm glad someone else did the trials and not me, because you always want to see what you want in your own trial. I think it is, as you say, Grace, it is a combination of several things. The fact we have used a lot of green manures, we've been very, very extensive in green manure usage over many, many years. The fact that we're putting carbon very deep. What I didn't point out about the carbon trial was, compared with my neighbour, we have more carbon deep down than my neighbour. Compared with the grassland, we have higher rates of carbon deep down. And also the bulk density of the soil in some of our plots was actually slightly better than my neighbour's grassland. So I think that's going to be probably due partly to the green manures. We have a lot of emphasis on very deep rooting green manures, earthworm activity. Because of deep rooting green manures, the previous speaker mentioned chicory. This really brings earthworms into play, and it really helps in terms of getting the carbon levels, at least maintaining carbon levels, if not improving them.
And another question down there?
Yeah. Louise Skelly, County Down. I wanted to ask you about we have sheep on one yard, so we have a bokashi bedding system for the straw and the bedding that comes out in one yard. In the other yard, we have brood mares and foals, where we have a mixture of straw pellets and wood shavings and horse manure, and we were trying to compost that as well. You touched a wee bit on wood shavings and didn't seem awfully keen on it. I just wanted to get your views on that as well, in terms of how you would approach that issue.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because wood shavings come up a lot, particularly with livestock bedding, and it is a notoriously difficult product to compost. I was called in many years ago to Lambourne in Berkshire to try and deal with the enormous amounts of wood shavings that were coming out of the horse industry there. And we did set up some composting trials. What it came down to, you need a huge amount of some high nitrogen material in order to rot down those wood shavings. So I think what we came up with was something like green, we were using green grass at a ratio of something like, I think it was about 6 or 7 to 1 of the wood shaving and manure in order to make that rot down. And even then it was still taking about 12 months. So it is possible. You need to add a lot of green material to it. So, grass is perhaps the obvious choice if you are a grassland farmer.
And just a little note as well, I don't know if anyone's seen any of those composter machines. They look like giant mouths nearly. And apparently those are going to be coming onto the Irish TAMS system, which is a grant system. They are applying for it to get onto the TAMS list as well, which might be interesting for some people. Do we have another question over there?
Yeah, with the Ramiel wood chip.
Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sorry, David Wallace. With the Ramiel wood chip, I noticed when you're chipping it, you're putting it directly into the manure spreader, and I assume spreading it straight away. Firstly, can you hold it when you actually cut the stems and keep it below 75 millimeters? Can you hold them for a period of time and chip, and then you know, because it seems you're trying to get it out as quick as you can, and I'm asking, is there a reason for that?
Yeah, there is a reason. It starts to heat up pretty quickly because it's green, it's fresh, it's high in moisture. If it starts to heat up, you are in danger of losing quite a lot of potential material because it's going into the atmosphere. You could cut the trees and leave it in the round for quite a few weeks, possibly up to a month in the winter or late winter. But you know, it will dry out quite quickly. We're using willow, which tends to dry pretty fast. Willow we found is one of the best trees possible for wood chip. So yes, you could leave it in the round, but you wouldn't want to leave it chipped. We literally spread it the same hour it's chipped, because if you leave it in the mud spreader overnight, by the following morning it's getting pretty hot. It really heats, and this is, you know, in December it might be almost freezing. It heats up really fast.
Yeah. And the other, just to follow with that, then for the wood stock or you know, wood from different. I can't remember the exact word that you used. Is there any potential for a bokashi type ferment with lab or a BAM, you know, actually bringing it to an optimum level of moisture and just leaving it as an unturned pile, covering it possibly with a silage wrap and actually having an anaerobic fermentation taking place?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know about anaerobic fermentations of wood. I'm not sure if it would work. Maybe somebody else knows more about this than I do. It has some possibilities, possibly. It will give off quite a bit of gas as well. I mean, you can obviously, you know, you can extract other materials from wood chip other than organic material. There is other potential. Heat, you know, we could be extracting heat from this material as well, but that's a composting process.
We have another question over here, and then maybe just one more question after that. Go ahead.
Hello, Iain. Thank you very much. Can I just ask, Inga Sokustula from Mungari Glass Farm in Connemara, can I just ask you about the shop there? Did you start that around COVID times, or have you had it a while? And can you talk a tiny bit about it?
Okay, yeah, the shop was pre-COVID. We put it up about 4 years before COVID. It very much came to its own during COVID. In fact, incidentally, the shop is built almost exclusively from timber, which we've harvested from within our farming system, not our fields, but the estate where we run our farm. We are tenant farmers. The shop did really well during COVID, and then it crashed as soon as COVID ended. It's been up and down. It's back up again now. It's doing really well at the moment, but it's, you know, the vegetable buying public are very fickle, and we've got used to that. It's turning out at the minute. It's turning over £2,000 a week, which is great. It's nearly 30% of our turnover, but it is unmanned. It's self-service. We run a Zettel system in there. People love that. They don't want to be served by somebody. They're quite happy to tap a screen, leave the money. They pay by card. It works really well, but doesn't have much to do with wood chip really. But hey.
And one final question down here.
Michael O'Callaghan, a dairy farmer here from Limerick. I also have a forestry enterprise on my farm. I have some ash trees at the minute with ash dieback on them. Is that material suitable for chipping, and is there any repercussions for using that type with a fungal disease already present in the timber?
Yeah, good question, Michael. I do appreciate a question of that type. It comes up a lot. We've also got ash dieback in our area. I've stopped getting paranoid about composting diseased anything, because actually, if you are composting it, the composting process will get rid of it. As Ramiel chip wood, I don't see a problem with adding ash dieback to soil at all. I don't see it's going to make any difference, certainly to the soil or to the local environment. So I wouldn't be really too concerned about any tree disease. There are so many tree diseases around. Almost every tree has got some type of disease going at the moment. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about it. If it's very dry, if it's died, it's not suitable for Ramule wood chip. You cannot use dead trees for Ramule. You have to have live, fresh material. So if it's died, you could chip it and you could compost it, but even that's going to be difficult. Composting dead material is really hard.
We have one final question. This is it.
Sorry, it's Malky Hughes here from BioFarm Connect. We actually do quite a lot with the Bokashi system. We have done trials in Northern Ireland with breaking down wood chip. One of the issues was what you had mentioned was the pine and the tannins within that. It can be quite hard to break down. But from what the previous speaker or the previous question was about around your wood chip, we've never actually done anything with that, but there is possibilities there to actually use that beneficial biology to help break down the structure of the actual wood chip that you're harvesting from.
You've actually done some work with softwoods, have you?
No, softwood, yes, but there was, it's taken, so if we are using a straw-based system, we can say that from 6 to 8 weeks that straw will actually break down within the Bokashi system and ferment. So what you're really trying to replace is the rotting process with the fermentation process. But then when it comes into the wood chip, you have the issue of your tannins that are actually antimicrobial. So it does leave it harder for them microbes to actually break down the structure of that wood chip.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I didn't, point I want to make now, which I didn't make then, is that we're looking at our farm in terms of how much of our farm would we need to be growing trees in order to be completely and totally self-sufficient in terms of the nutrient cycle, not to have to bring anything in at all, including the waste tree. And the figure I come up with is around 20%. Now, 20% is not a bad figure for every farm to be aiming for in terms of reforestation. Okay, you don't get a big carbon sequestration for many, many years. It takes decades, really, but we've got to start somewhere. And if we are being able to look at farms in a much more longer-term, self-sufficient potential, we're going to have to all start thinking about planting trees. And they're not just there to look good, they're also there to be used. They're there to be used within our farming system. I think timber, tree, waste, and Ramule chip wood has got great future for farming. It really has. It could open up huge possibilities.
Round of applause for Iain, please. Thank you very much.